Hello, everybody. Welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to everything. And today we've got our typical three topics, a nice lineup of folks to help us talk about these topics. The first one is going to be a somber one. It is the 22nd anniversary of 9/11. The question is, where were you during that time? And how have your feelings developed or changed over the time? And what do you think of Leonard Peikoff's interview with Bill O'Reilly? It's been years since I had seen it. I watched it again, and I remember fondly how stupid Bill O'Reilly was, and am thankful for the fact that he's off the air. He's a scourge to humanity. That's my point of view. But we're gonna talk about we're gonna get into the weeds about 9/11 and what it means today. Also in the news, a prominent Democrat in Minneapolis who was one of the at the forefront of the defund the police movement, was viciously attacked in her driveway. She got her leg broken. She had several cuts and bruises. In front of her children, she was attacked, and now is an advocate for the police and thanking the Minneapolis police. What say you about that? Is there any legitimacy to the defund the police movement, or is it just a bunch of crap? Now, Trains for London are cracking down on unhealthy food. Now, what does this mean to you? They've decided to ban cheese advertising. I personally love cheese. I think the world would be a worse place without it. But hey, man, this is their point of view. Is this an overreach? Is this too much? Is it legitimate? I have answers to that. I'm sure everybody on our esteemed panel has answers to that. Today, we're joined by our usual suspects, Marco and Richard. Mark Lewis, and the Dark Lord Emperor himself, Razi Ginsburg, has chosen to grace us with his presence. Thank Dad for that. So, guys, let's start with 9/11 first. Do you guys remember where you were when that tragedy unfolded? And can you tell us a little personal anecdote about that? And then we'll talk about some of the philosophical implications. Who wants to start? I'll let somebody start who wants to start first.
Well, I'll start. I was at the time I was working with a staffing company doing consulting, and we had started this business, and most of our clients were in the towers. And so when the process happened, it was trying to call our clients to see if they were okay, not being able to get through, and then slowly watching their lives, their foundation go away, watching the relative safety of the United States that were essentially untouchable across the waters go away. And it was destabilizing in terms of who we were as a country, how we were going to handle it, what we stood for, what we didn't stand for, what other people stood for. And it was an incredibly thought-provoking experience emotionally, because I lost clients, I lost friends in the experience, and of course everyone was tremendously impacted by it. It completely changed my world, our business, the lives of the people that I had grown to care about. And
indeed,
yeah, and the question really became, so what are we going to stand for? And it's often the case that I like to say that you're not quite clear where your boundaries are, how to describe them. If someone says, so, what's okay around this and what's not, you say, just be a good person, be respectful. But when then someone crosses your boundaries, you know exactly where the boundary is. It's right there. Here's what's right, and here's what's wrong, and here's what I want, and here's what's unacceptable to me. And for a country, that gave, for myself and my colleagues, we became really clear about the idea of freedom, the idea of individual rights. And it was a renaissance for a lot of objectivist beliefs that I had been sharing with my friends, who then got to encounter them in a real situation.
Well, I wish I had that experience of a renaissance. The people around me were sort of lost. I felt the politicians were conceptually lost as well, but that's a topic we'll start Rozzy, were you in swaddling clothes at the time that this happened? Or do you, how old are you?
I'm old. I'm 40 years old. So I was
Okay.
19 back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I was actually at an airport about to board a flight. I was in Amsterdam on my way to London to visit my dad. And yeah, that's where, the TVs were all on. And that's I basically watched what was going on as it was going on until it was time to board my flight.
they grounded you?
No, they didn't. And actually it was, at the time they didn't know how many planes were missing. They thought there were more than eventually there were. And yeah, boarding was kind of not really what I wanted to do at that moment, but also, yeah, it was this kind of thing that when I watch back footage of it, especially after the first plane, there's, the way it was reported in the news, there was a lot of confusion. Was it an accident or what exactly happened there? You know, hindsight is always 2020, but those of us who come from where I come from would know exactly what it is as soon as the first plane hit the tower.
Well, certainly as soon as the second plane hit the tower, there was no doubt. Marcos, Richard, where were you guys when this happened?
Well, I was in my early 20s working in central London for an advertising company at the time, a media company. So I was recording radio adverts when I heard about it, and somebody told me on the phone initially. And what I remember most about the early stages of that was people often talk these days about, rather crassly, about breaking the internet. Well, even though we were a media company with a super fast internet connection, we couldn't open a single web page. We couldn't see the BBC, we couldn't see CNN, we couldn't open anything at all. It was literally frozen. And so for the first hour, as the news came through, it came through totally verbally from people on the phone and people commenting in the office. And it was about an hour before we could get a TV rigged up in the office, so we could see the images that went with what we were being told. And it added to the sense at the time that it sounded like somebody was describing a film. It sounded totally like somebody was describing some disaster film and it sounded so exaggerated and so off the wall that actually seeing the images after knowing all the facts, or at least a chunk of them, was a deeply surreal experience and left a real strange taste.
Yeah, it's not often that you can say this event is going to change the world. At the time, you were aware that this would have changed the world from then onwards. I was in the office as well, and like Richard, I had connections, so we're actually one of the first events witnessed nearly live on the internet. But to me, the most poignant point is that I think the attack happened on a Tuesday. On the Saturday, here in London, there was schedule the last night of the prom, which is the end of a summer season of classical concerts and stuff, and we were in Hyde Park with massive crowd, and the mood was incredibly somber, and
that's an event where people wave Union Jacks en masse, and it's quite a patriotic finish to a concert. So it's normally a euphoric event, and although people still had their flags, they were waving them in a totally different manner.
And one of the guest orchestras was an American company. I can't remember where they were. I don't think they were from New York, but they played Barbara's Adagio. And since then, just associate the music. I mean, the Adagio is already in itself very, very poignant and very emotional. But since then, every time I hear it, I just go back to the time. It's quite.
And so for a time, the world seemed to be on the United States side. We went from the great Satan to the country everybody sympathized with, so much so that at the Super Bowl, I remember that year, Bono was singing in the halftime, and he opened up his leather jacket to reveal an American flag inside there. And for a time, people became very patriotic, as Mark Lewis was saying. Even he experienced a revival of objectivist ideas. And Bush seemed to take that united sensibility and demand some form of retribution and action. Did Bush do the right thing? I think there's going to be some unanimity on this council with respect to whom he focused on. He decided to find the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, who seemed to be harbored by the Taliban in Afghanistan, and to focus on them. Objectivists had an entirely different point of view about how he should have dealt with that. Razi, do you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, basically, I have something to say about pretty much every word you said there, but the one that I want to start with is the world seemed to be on America's side, you said. So I recommend that people watch, and this is not going to be enjoyable, but so the BBC has this show called Question Time. It's on every Thursday. I think there's a few months off in the year. It's like a panel show. They have I think one politician from each of the three major parties. Sometimes they have somebody from a smaller party. They have a couple of journalists, tend to be like one sort of from the left, one sort of from the right, and with an audience. So right after 9/11, 2 days later, watch the Question Time from September 13th. So the US ambassador to the UK was on, and one by one, audience members were saying how this was basically America's fault. And, you know, there was very much this sentiment in many places. Yeah, you know, governments around the world wouldn't say that because obviously they didn't want to get on America's bad side at that time. But many of the people in this country as well had the idea that America is, you know, this big bully that controls the world and tries to police it, and got what it deserves with 9/11. And this is why, I mean, we'll get to this later in the conversation, but this is why I wanted to talk about what today's leaders would do, because if you look at what leaders did back then, they were definitely following the culture, and what they did was bad enough. But when we get to today's leaders, we'll try to imagine how it would be, and I think it would be worse.
The one fond memory I have of Bill O'Reilly, who I consider to be a pretty deep dipshit, was when a pundit came on his show and attempted to put the blame for 9/11 on the United States. And he said, "Get the hell off of my show. You're an idiot." And he kicked him off his show. I thought that was appropriate. I thought the sentiment of the people generally bended towards the United States. And of course, there are those in academia who blamed us all along. Mark, but you claimed you experienced a sort of a renaissance in objectivist ideas. Explain that a little bit more with respect to that. Do you think Bush did the right thing by attacking Afghanistan, as opposed to, say, Iran, as Peikoff said?
So take those in turn. In the face of obvious aggression, it's easy for people to coalesce, to say, okay, that is wrong, and because that's wrong, we can now unite in the face of that, and we look for ideas that can support that. Now, of course, I was promoting objectivism heavily in the face of it, to really talk about what is it that the United States stands for. And amongst the people in my circles, they were just more aware of, available to the conversation. So they were willing to read things, they were willing to talk about them, they were willing to talk about principles and ideas, rather than the normal BS, well, who's going to build the roads kind of conversations that you often get when you're talking about capitalism, you're talking about morality, you're talking about individual rights. And so it was, for a good year or two, it was a golden age in my social circles in terms of having really intelligent conversation and being able to get down to principles, ideas. What does it mean to have rights? What does it mean to have freedom? What kind of freedom are we fighting for? And that's what I mean by it was a renaissance. And you know, quite frankly, the people who I knew at that time still have a much deeper relationship with objectivism than most of the people that I've encountered and talked to about objectivism over time. I still have great friends from that period of time.
And did Bush do the right thing attacking Afghanistan and Iraq? Or was there another?
I think those are two different questions. Did he do the right thing in attacking Afghanistan? I think absolutely. I think Afghanistan was the place to go because that was the place that it came from. Everyone understood that, and pretty much everyone supported going after Afghanistan, given that that's where that was the source of the issue. Now, should he have gone after Iraq? Should he have gone after Iran? Those. There are two questions about. One, are you actually going to solve the problem? If you're actually going to solve the problem, then going after Iran would have been the heart of the issue. But given that we're probably not going to solve the problem, we have to deal with what is the global narrative about what we're doing as a power. And going after Iraq, I think, was a horrible move. Going after Afghanistan, 100% right. And if we had really focused on that, I think the world would have stayed behind us. But once we got off into, like, we didn't do anything with Saudi Arabia, even though most of the people were from Saudi Arabia. Going after Iraq, I think, really distorted the American psyche and distorted the world's view of America. And I think that was a huge mistake.
Well, Marco and Richard, according to Razi, immediately following the attack, there was already this distortion that America used dollar diplomacy to manipulate the world. We interfered with everybody. We were the world's policemen. We had it coming because we were a colonial power. Do you think that the war in Iraq distorted something even more? Do you think that we should have gone into Afghanistan? Or do you think, like Peikoff, Iran should have been the primary target?
Well, just before I answer that, I just want to respond to what Razi said earlier about the BBC and that Question Time program, just to put it in context, just to make sure that we don't give a misleading impression from my standpoint, certainly as somebody in London, which is that obviously, as Razi well knows, the BBC is not the people of Britain in many ways. And although that I haven't seen the program you're talking about, and I don't doubt for a second that that's what it showed, my own experience of everybody I spoke to within London was not of that lefty anti-US crowd from the off. And it was just a sense that we were in the center of history changing and it being a hugely dramatic event. And
I want to add on to that before you go on. There was a famous commentator here who was a comedic commentator on the radio by the name of Phil Hendry, who was a hard leftist who was converted by the 9/11 attacks to being absolutely conservative and a hawk. And so I saw lots of people on the left convert, but go ahead.
And the other point I wanted to make was that, and this is very hard really to describe now, but certainly people of my age in their early 20s then were an awful lot less political than they are now. Politics didn't dominate every conversation in the way it does now. People didn't view things through that lens in the same way, with the exception of the academics, the lefties that you referred to earlier. So it certainly didn't give that impression to me. As for your question as to whether the US did the right thing, well, it's quite obviously not, isn't it? It's quite obvious that I think one of the things that most struck me in the coverage since is the Pentagon. Too often, all the coverage is dominated by the two towers, and the Pentagon is pushed to one side and almost ceases to exist. Now, I understand that on part that might be to cover up the humiliation or the complacency that they wasn't protected or whatever. But in terms of a response to a terrorist attack, if an attack on the Pentagon does not constitute an act of war, I don't know what does. And that alone would justify any response to the aggressor.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump did very few good things, but the best thing he did was dropping the biggest non-nuclear bomb on the head of ISIS in Afghanistan when he moved in 2017. And that's exactly what they should have done above Tora Bora, where the rats were hiding after committing the atrocity. There's no way here. Something very weird happened. Suddenly the victim became the aggressors became the victims, really. Suddenly Islamophobia became a thing, yeah, and everybody seemed to roll over and suddenly protect the side that actually you could argue originated the whole problem in the first place. now we got a bit of, I don't know whether it's a specific issue to Britain or not, but the left here seems always to fall on the side of Islam and protect even these crazy fanatic fundamentalist whackers who claim we should kill everybody who's not converted to Islam. They always seem to excuse them. Just look what they've done with the Taliban when we left Afghanistan. The argument from the apologists was, oh yeah, but now they're so much better, these guys. You know, they love people. They love, for 20 years, they've been loving democracy. Well, you see how long it took for them to start banning women from going to school and murdering people, stoning, all this kind of stuff that those kind of savages do because they're savages.
It seems to me the left does have that David and Goliath power hierarchy notion of good. The lower you are in the power hierarchy, the more the more oppression you probably experience, and the more of a moral sanction they give you to do whatever the hell you want. And those who are higher on the power hierarchy have less sanction to defend themselves, since they got there by virtue of oppression. So, Razi, how do you think the leaders would respond today if a similar attack happened today? Would there be a difference?
Yes, but I just want to point out just how badly, I don't think we realize how badly the leaders responded back then. So Bush, yeah, it was great that everybody was, using fighting words, and everybody wanted America to respond militarily. But also Bush, it was only a few days after 9/11 that he called Islam the religion of peace. It took a month after 9/11, or something like a month before America actually did anything, and what they, militarily, and what they did was against Afghanistan, which was the easiest country to build a coalition around. Now, I have no issue with the fact that Afghanistan was was a target. I just would have had other targets as well. And also, I would not start, the first thing they dropped on Afghanistan was food and medicine. I would not start a war or start the military operation in that way.
How very Christian of them.
Yeah. And I think if we really, and by the way, Iraq, the reason Iraq was second, I mean, this is my interpretation, but the reason Iraq was second was because, despite the disagreements in the UN Security Council and so on, Iraq was the easiest to build a coalition around after Afghanistan, because they had a coalition. It wasn't everybody, but it was more than they would have gotten if they wanted, if Bush wanted to attack Saudi Arabia or Iran. And this is the Ayn Rand Center UK. Ayn Rand herself had some. I think when I looked this up today, I was gonna read this quote, and the bookmark was already in place. I think I may have read this on a similar topic, but I'll read it again. So this is a question she was asked in, I think it was the Fort Hall Forum in 1980. What should be the U.S. policy in the Iranian crisis? How should we get the hostages back? This was while the embassy in Iran was taken over by what is now the regime there. And her answer was never to allow the country to get into that situation. It's certainly the fault of our foreign policy, and at present, there is no right course of action. It's too late. If we didn't march with force the first or second day after the hostages were taken, nothing we do after that will be any good, and it will take us years to live it down. Those years are still, in progress. This is, it's only gotten worse since, and so this is a very long answer to your question, Mark. But I think if we look from back then through 9/11 until today, we'll see that we've only gotten weaker. I think the response today would be much weaker. When Obama said that there's a red line in Syria, and that's the use of chemical weapons, and that's regardless of whether or not you think there should have been a red line. Once you say that, you can't not do it when the red line is crossed, and he didn't do anything. And then Trump, there was what was it, the drone that was shot down, and he also he said, I was given some options for military targets, but I saw that like 100 people or 150 people would die at a military base. And so I decided not to do it. This is where we are today in terms of how we would respond to something like this. So yeah, I think we're very much likely to turn the other cheek, bomb some empty building.
But don't you think that comes from general population misunderstanding what the concept of innocence means, and the concepts of innocence within aggressor nations, for example? Marco and Richard, could you possibly unpack that concept? Because I think objectivists have a rather unique perspective on, in a state of a defensive war, or even just defending yourself. If somebody, a bystander or innocent person, or someone not necessarily engaged in the conflict, dies as a result of you defending yourself, it's the moral responsibility of the aggressor, not the person defending themselves. And even more so with a country that's an aggressor, because the population is composed of, I think objectivists define it as 3 types of people: collaborators, active collaborators, passive acceptors, and resistors. So in that case, that should give a moral pass to defend yourself with morality on your side. Marco and Richard, what say you to all that?
Well, the enemy of freedom is force. So when you're facing force, when somebody is attacking you, or a bully is interfering with your life, the only way to remove the threat is actually to neutralize it. And when I say neutralize, it's not just writing a letter saying I'm really, really upset by your behavior. It's just, if somebody punches in the face, you punch them in the face with twice the strength. So next time they think even of attacking you again, they'll think twice and they go and pick on somebody else. The issue here is, if a country attacks you and you retaliate, you have the moral right to retaliate, but only that. If they decided to put their civilians at risk, is the consequence of their action of attacking you in the first place. So take the example of Hezbollah and the Gaza Strip and stuff like that. Well, they throw rockets, then they protect themselves with civilian. And if Israel retaliates, it's their fault because they are killing children. Well, hang on a second. Who put the children in danger in the first place? And that's a kind of thing that people don't seem to understand. That the same as the case of Japan. Japan initiated the war against America. So the fact that a nuclear bomb was dropped upon them is just something that is the direct cause of their decision. It's not America's fault. It's Japan's policy determined what the outcome was from day one. And that was the moral outcome.
And one of the things that I think about in relation to this, in terms of the response of leaders as well, is things like, well, Margaret Thatcher's response to the Iranian embassy siege in London in the early 80s, when she sent in the SAS, who scaled down the side of the embassy building in London, broke through the windows, killed the hostage takers, and freed the hostages. And at the time, it came out since that she was being driven somewhere at the time. The limousine had to pull into the side of the road while she gave that order to the SAS to go ahead with it, and while she waited on the phone to find out the outcome. And I can only compare that with seeing George W. Bush sort of reading children's books and staying in that classroom for so long when he was initially told of the attacks. As a comparison, and that image, even at the time, struck me as deeply unsettling. The fact that you wouldn't just stand up and go, "Look, something important's happened. I've got to leave and get on with it," rather than being focused on some PR or being in a state of frozen panic. Because unless you have your principles clear from the beginning, then when you face a crisis, you don't know where to start, and that is part of the problem that underlies the response from leadership all over the place.
So, Razi, God forbid something like this should happen in the future. We seem to have created a situation where this is quite possible. It could happen again, probably a more disastrous effect. What would be your recommendation as an objectivist to do should this happen again?
I mean, my recommendation is not to wait until it happens again. to certainly start by cutting ties with all these supposed allies that are educating people from the moment they're born to hate everything that the West is. And yeah, I would still, certainly in the case of Iran, I think military action is right. It's the right thing to do today, and I would do it in such a way that is a warning to anybody else, and of course that warning should be acted on if
Now, Leonard Peikoff has since walked back his comments, but he suggested even nuclear weapons. Now, he said at the time even that it would be up to the military to decide exactly what kinds of weapons would achieve the policy that the politicians set down. But would you take that off the table or no?
I mean, I definitely wouldn't take it off the table. The idea that, you need to send your soldiers to die when there is an option of winning a war without them dying, basically they would die to protect the people on the other side. I absolutely would not take anything off the table that would protect the lives of the victims of the war.
So perhaps objectivists need to come up with an alternative to just war theory, which is what I think our commanders and our soldiers abide by now. So Mark,
by the way, I have a name for it. If we are going to come up with it, I would call it just war theory, because
there you go.
Actually,
just war theory 2.0. So Mark, yeah, the idea is we cut ties with these authoritarian regimes. We cut them off. We don't trade with them. We don't exchange with them. We're on a war footing with them because we know them to be hostile to Western civilization. And we send out the warning, if you attack us, we'll annihilate you. And then we do it if they in fact do attack us. Do you agree with that position, or would you be more surgical in your approach, as so many people think is the ideal today?
I think it's extraordinarily complicated, because when you start down a path, it's not just the first steps of the path that you're committing to. You're committing to the entire journey. And realistically, what you need in order to go a long way down a path is a coalition, and you need the support of the society, the support of the other people, because it's not just a war of physical means. It's a war of narrative. It's a war of understanding. It's a war of ideas. And so if we only look at, okay, we could attack them and accomplish a certain set of objectives, and the question is, are those objectives actually going to get us in the direction we want to go? And I think the answer is largely yes. If we were to do exactly what you described, the United States would demonstrate that we're serious. But the question is, what are the principles that we are using narratively to describe it? How are we justifying what we're doing, and how are we building the story? How are we building coalitions with people in the name of the principles? We would actually have to be principled so that we could promote principles. And in order to actually do the work, we're going to have to create, realistically, some bullshit story in order to get enough people to agree in order to do it. And now we're pushing the bullshit story. And that complicates the actual wartime situation.
We need a bullshit story to attack Iran?
I don't think we need bullshit stories. I don't think we need narratives. I'm tired of coalition building. We don't have to excuse ourselves or get people behind us in order to defend ourselves. We don't need that justification anymore. In fact, we have to break away from this concept that we have to build coalitions of mostly authoritarian regimes behind us before we can actually act in our own interests. That's my point of view. Marco, Richard, what say you with respect to this final question on this topic?
Yeah, the biggest issue is that even within our own countries, we need to make the case. We need to explain why it is moral to retaliate if you're attacked. Right now, the culture is so incredibly decayed and rotten that people will never get it. Nobody seems to make the point that why are we pushing capitalism? Because capitalism is inherently good? No, it's because capitalism is the only political system which is underpinned by freedom to act, to take the action that benefits your own life, that benefits the people you value. And this freedom is underpinned by freedom to trade, to produce, to create stuff. That's the economic freedom, which is underpinned by the freedom to think, which is the way of a human being to live in the way appropriate for a human being, following reason. We're not arguing capitalism because we want to make lots of money, but because we want to be free and use our mind in order to live in the world.
I think one thing I'd like to say on your point about coalition building is how my own view has changed over the time. And back then, as a naive person in their early 20s, I did buy into the line that you needed the UN security sanction for your retaliation. And of course, now I understand that collectivist response that includes countries that with dubious behaviors anyway is utterly the wrong way to go, and you've already got the justification for responding as self-defense. I think one of the other aspects that I find particularly difficult is the generation that are born after the event or that are too young to know it, and how you manage to impress upon them the enormity of what it was in among a generation that's quite cynical and prone to disbelieve and to throw, well, the planet's burning, so we've got bigger problems now, back at you. I understand, like Leonard Peikoff's point, that a picture is not an argument, but I do often feel when I'm looking back at the footage from 9/11 is that it's very much about rubble and buildings, and not so much about, you know, the 3,000 near 3,000 people who died, whereas the imagery shown on the other side is always about babies and children, babies and mothers. Now, I know that is really, you know, the dignity and integrity of the West not to exploit the deaths from that point of view, but you do need to make sure that you stress upon people born subsequently just how devastating and important the event was.
It's certainly difficult to make a narrative and build a group of supporters behind you when the ethics and philosophy are so corrupt that even the commonsensical things that you guys say would make absolutely no sense to some college students out there. It's disturbing. Well, folks, our next topic is a prominent Democrat in Minnesota who was at the forefront of the charge to defund the police, was attacked in her own driveway by 4 criminals in front of her children. I think they tried to carjack her, and they broke her leg and injured her pretty severely in the process. She is now, I think, firmly on the other side. She believes that the police should be funded. She's thanking the Minneapolis police for helping her out, as opposed to what she did before. What say you to this sea change? Razi, was there any justification to the defund the police movement? If so, why? If not, why not?
Of course not, because we need a police, and you know, this is proof of why we need it. Yeah, I mean, this story has several, you know, different aspects to it. One is the one that I don't like is the right kind of trolling her for, you know, now she gets it, you know, because she's been a victim of a crime. On the other hand, the fact that, you know, the fact that people actually get into politics, use their power in order to help, essentially what defunding the police is helping criminals get away with crimes. That is the main issue here, because again, we hear about her because of, you know, because of her position, because of the fact that she you know, she was for defunding the police and now she's against it. We don't hear of all the other victims of crimes as loudly as we're hearing about this. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's terrible that this happened. It's certainly terrible that, you know, her children were there. And yeah, and it's terrible that the police doesn't actually take care of criminals the way they should.
You know, Mark, when they were talking about defund the police, I was on rather loud voice on social media for no, you have to fund them more. You just have to train them properly. Apparently, a police officer has to qualify with their sidearm, their weapon, which they bring to every conflict they have multiple times a year. But they rarely ever pull that weapon in self-defense. But they constantly have physical altercations with people and have to subdue people, for which they are very poorly trained. And bringing a gun to that a physical exchange with somebody makes it far more likely that a lethal exchange is going to happen. My perspective was, you need to fund them more so they can have body cameras. You need to fund them more so that the people on the ground were at least blue belts in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, who could defend themselves appropriately with the use of subduing somebody physically with the minimum amount of force, and protect their sidearm from being taken from them. And that's where we needed to put primary focus. What say you?
So absolutely. As it happens, I worked with a security company, and we did consulting for local police in terms of how do you train policemen to deal with these kinds of issues. And it's an extraordinary complex set of choices that the policeman needs to make, both in terms of how do you deal with emergency situations where things are really going down, but how do you deal with the situation before it gets to that point? How do you subdue people? How do you talk to them? And all of that requires training. If you want your police to be good, they must be trained. And that also includes supervision within the police to make sure that the bad apples, which they do exist, there are cops who abuse their power because they have power, they do abuse it. They are a small minority, but they have an impact, and that cascades throughout the department. If you take money away from them, right, that's an example of the stupidity of our political process and our electorate. I like to say that the things that people are taught are that if you want something to happen, your job is to demand it somehow. It's not your responsibility to actually think, is this possible? Is this actually going to lead to where I want it to go? It's simply to demand the thing that you want. And if you demand it loud enough, somehow the politicians will make it happen. And defund the police is exactly that. We want better safety, but we don't know how to actually get that. So what we're just going to say is defund the police. And like most stupidity, the more you enact it, the worse results you get. And so unfortunately, the results are exactly what you would expect and exactly the opposite of what we need, which is more training, better police, better social recognition of the function of police, which is to protect our safety, the one thing that the government is supposed to do.
So this defund the police movement, Marco and Richard, started with the with the killing of George Floyd, where it was clear that the police officer really didn't have proper training in subduing somebody in a manner that didn't harm them, wasn't in tune with what was happening with the suspect that he had underneath him, wasn't even in tune with the crowd that was around him. It seems like the way in which our legal system is turning, where pretty much anything a human being does now, there can be a law found against him. So we're all in some ways behaving as criminals. Attracts a certain type of personality to that job, as opposed to one where the laws are minimal. They are about protecting property and life, and the person is essentially a night watchman watching over you. Do we need legal reform as well? As of course, officers have to be trained in how to resolve conflicts and use physical force appropriately, but what other reforms do we need to make the people on the ground, especially the people who feel like they're victims of police brutality, more safe around the police?
Yeah, well, this is exactly a case of our current society, when people react to events without having an overall view of how things are panning out. It's quite interesting. This is called the reality show, because this is a typical example of somebody living on a concrete basis world without ever having a principle in their life, clearly. So if a criminal dies during a police operation, oh, let's defund the police, then she gets hurt. Oh, the police should stop them. At no point she seemed to have thought, hang on a second, is this the result of my initial ideas, my initial reaction, or this one happened by God intervened and therefore things happen because there's something beyond what actually human life is. It's true. We need to reform the police, but also we have to make sure that people don't expect to find a police force that represents what the idea of diversity is. So you need people able to do the job because they can do the job, not because they're the right color, they're the right gender or whatever. And that's part of the issue right now.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect that I notice out of this is that it's always about what you're against and not what you're for. A common problem in the world today, and clearly this particular woman, they want to defund the police, and they add the word "and reconstruct" at the end of that sentence, but say nothing about reconstruct what, how, or how that should be different or how it should work. And one of the key aspects that from this side of the pond in terms of the George Floyd is the elevation of him to a hero in the course of this. There's like a mural in Manchester here in the UK of George Floyd. Manchester's got absolutely nothing to do with George Floyd, what happened. There's no parallel whatsoever. But you create a myth out of the person that distorts what a hero is in the first place, and all of that feeds back into the culture and of course how this woman is responding. She's responding to this incident as the hero, as a victim. I'm now a heroic victim. And that's, if you set your heroes up to be only whether they can win the Victim Olympics or not, then you've really got everything upside down.
It seems that's exactly where we are. Victims are heroes. Heroes are not heroic. They're actually whipped and castigated by the public. Yes, I think I first confronted this article in the New York Post, and I don't remember her at any point in the article apologizing for her stance before, saying that she was wrong for it and has changed her perspective and is so sorry that she might have contributed to, the endangering her community that she's supposed to represent. Any final thoughts on this particular topic, Razi?
Not really, except, the usual point that, this is why our work is so important, so that people can understand why, we do need a government, and we do need to have a well-funded police force, and hopefully we can defund a lot of other stuff, because a lot needs to be defunded, but the police is not one of those things.
That's right. And the police are starting to pick up on the Gracie essentials. Many police departments are starting to incorporate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu into their training tactics. You guys in the LA should come to the Machados, Jean-Jacques Machados, work your Jiu-Jitsu so you don't have to use that gun. It is a fantastic art for self-defense. And like I said, I don't think you should be on the beat unless you're in shape. You can run a good mile. Your body's totally functional, and you're a blue belt minimum in jiu-jitsu. If you're not, get the hell off the street. Don't deal with people because you're not capable of it. Well, folks, they're at it again in London. The trains are trying to get us healthy because, of course, we can't do that for ourselves. So they're cracking down on unhealthy food, and they're banning certain advertisements. The newest victim is cheese. Well, I happen to like cheese. I like cheese a lot. There are actually some very good pro-life healthy benefits to cheese, not just the pleasure of eating it, but some of its contents are actually very good for your gut, the source of our immune system. Razi, what do you think about this latest assault on our liberty and this latest infantilization of us human beings?
So Transport for London likes to ban ads, and this is the latest ad they've banned. But I read the article. It said something about they follow some health advice thing that says you shouldn't advertise things that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. Now, Mark, I know that you recently quit sugar. Would seeing an ad that advertises something high in sugar make you immediately unable to continue with your diet?
Well, I am an automaton, and I do wear Depends. I'm still an infant, puking, mewling, and pooping my pants. So yes, I would be moved by that to destroy all of my values, my health values. No, I'm not moved by peer pressure. I'm not moved by advertisements. I'm only moved by what I think is good. And I don't think sugar is good for me, so I don't use it anymore. But I do like cheese. Fat is good for you, and you should have fats. It's not the enemy. But that's for each person to decide for themselves. It's not for this association, whatever the hell it's called, to tell me what to do. Mark, what say you? Do you agree with me, or are you on the side of the powers that be overseeing what we do because we can't oversee ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think that we first should recognize how the government is just so smart and intelligent, and that their standards are obviously the right and true standards. Once we start there, then of course this makes sense. We should definitely tell people how they should live, what they should do, how they shouldn't act, right?
But you're right, Mark. They started the food pyramid, right, which has been probably the number one cause of type 2 diabetes, obesity, all across the United States of America. Thank you, government, for that.
And this is more of that. We want to stop fat and sugar and salt. Okay, fat. The thing that all of your cells are built out of. Yeah, we should reduce that. We wouldn't want to have strong cells. We wouldn't want to have good hormones. No, none of that. It's such an insult that they take such a simplistic and obviously questionable. It might be right. It might be wrong. There might be parts of it that make sense. There might be parts of it that don't make sense. But it's clear that the scientific consensus is not in. There is no, so to impose that, not only is it wrong, it's stupid. They're imposing things that make people sicker. And again, as someone who ate sugar as the main source, right? I was vegan for a time, and hey, I could have sugar. Sugar's not meat. Sugar, it's crazy that as I learned that, I really should have fat. Fat is really good for me. And my body got much healthier. My skin got much healthier, my hair, everything. It's not only just infuriating that they try to control me, right? I don't want the government I don't want anyone to control me. It's not only infuriating, it's insulting that such shoddy research and such shoddy science is being promoted as the thing, and it's happening everywhere. And the only good thing is that more and more people are waking up because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, the government nobody associated with the government has to tell us how to live our lives. They should just protect us from bad guys. Marcos, and Richard, what do you say?
Well, as somebody who used to have to listen to thousands of adverts back to back for a living, I think I'm now immune to advertising. So nothing touches me when it comes to an advert. It's apart from spelling mistakes and grammar and stuff like that. But anyway, I think one of the things that we're going down the road of here in London is that the mayor is banning so many adverts. So the only adverts left will be those for his own propaganda, those that include things like thinking that somebody looking at you on the tube for longer than 2 seconds is a potential rapist and you should report them immediately, and other such posters like that. And the only other ones that seem to be there all the time is they've now got posters on the gates as you come through to exit a station at certain stations for Islamic charities. Those used to appear just in Ramadan, but now they seem to be at certain stations year round. So it's a proper branding exercise. That seems to be in a different category to some of the other adverts, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, like statism wasn't bad enough, Of course, these guys, you have to understand them. For a year and a half, 2 years, they told us when to walk, what to do, which member of the family we could meet. So yeah, they enjoy that a lot. So they want just to continue with stupid rules. It's just too good for them.
Well, there was a time right before the American Revolution when politicians who took those kinds of liberties were tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail. And governors who decided to take those kinds of positions had their mansions disassembled brick by brick and ran out of town for their lives. I'm not against that, folks. I'm not advocating for violence, but I'm saying you should certainly make the political class afraid of you. A couple of super chats before we end this discussion with an announcement. Catherine for $1.99. So many horrible memories. That is true. But there is good news, folks. Objectivism exists, and it is the antidote to this irrationality. Jonathan Honig, $5. Thank you, Jonathan. Robert Nasir for $1.49. Thank you, sir. Apollo Zeus for £2. I am the best. Okay. I agree with that with respect to me. I'm kidding. Robert Nasir for 1776. Thank you. I love that amount. This is always a difficult discussion and always an important one. Thank you for addressing the issues of this day rationally, graciously, and uncompromisingly. Thank you, Robert, for being a voice of reason out there yourself. There's no upcoming shows today, but this Saturday we are launching a new course with Jim Brown on money creation and its consequences. This course will be available to platinum and above ARC UK members. Folks, like and subscribe. Listen to this content, spread it around. This is the kind of metastatization we need. We need objectivism to metastasize across the world because it's the antidote to the irrationality out there. Folks,
Mark, just another very quick announcement. So
yes.
In case anybody missed it, so yesterday we premiered on the channel a lecture by Keith Weiner, Anti-Concept and Money. This took place last month here in London. Marco and Richard recorded it. We only had the audio, but then they edited the video, and this is hopefully a new thing that you'll see more and more of on this channel and on the Briefly Objective more edited videos. It's a great lecture. I highly recommend this. These lectures usually are a perk of membership of gold level and above, but this one is available for everyone. It's on our channel now. So since we have no shows coming up today, you can click the link as soon as this one is over. And
yeah, folks, don't get fooled by the demagogues again. And the one way to do that is to get rational philosophy and all of the stuff that falls out under the umbrella of rational philosophy. Also, I want you to do something today, tomorrow, every day of the week. Remember to check your premises. Peace.